This is our April Vermont Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Office Hours. Again, really appreciative of everyone to be here. We have quite a few colleagues from the Student Support Services Division from the Agency of Education here. And our focus today is taking a holistic approach. So we're thinking about tiered systems of support in a very dynamic and multidimensional way, thinking about early MTSS, MTSS, of course, standing for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, VTmtss, and special education. So I will pause here and let a few folks and my co-facilitators here to introduce themselves. I'll firstly introduce myself as MJ Jared, she, her pronouns. I'm the program manager for the VTmtss team, and just grateful everyone is here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Santo, and I am the State Director of Special Education. Good to see you all.
Thanks, Cassie.
Hi, everyone. Amy Murphy. I'm the Inclusion Coordinator on the Early Education team. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Talia Garcia. I'm the Early MTSS Coordinator on the Early Education team.
Great. Thank you. And just want to thank our VTmtss colleagues, Nancy Helen and Ashley Riando, who are here to help provide logistical support for today as well. So you have a breadth and wealth of information or folks who have a lot of different areas of expertise when we get into our question and answer session, which we hope will be very lively and interactive. So we'd like to first start with our presentation, focusing on our Student Support Services Division belief statement. Uniquely today, we are presenting on behalf of our division, with each of our content area divisions our teams being represented, that being early education, VTmtss, and special education. So our belief statement, which we have created in the last year and really subscribes and is our North Compass for the work in which we do collectively and within our individual teams. So we believe that each and every student, family, and educator is critical to collaborative, high quality, and comprehensive educational opportunities. The division is committed to promoting equity and inclusive access to high quality educational supports through its system or services, expertise, and guidance within the Vermont educational system. The division prioritizes proactive communication, accessibility, and intentional engagement within Vermont's educational communities to strive towards equity of educational opportunity and sense of belonging for all. And we collectively and coactively completed or put together that belief statement, which again is our North Star with the work that we do within the Student Support Services Division at the Vermont Agency of Education. So very briefly today, our focus is on two primary objectives. The first is to briefly review the purpose of special education as it relates to those ages 3 to 21, early education and early MTSS and VTmtss. We'll talk about the myriad of supports and an overview of each of our teams' roles and responsibilities and how we can support the field in areas of expertise. And the primary focus of our conversation today is really to discuss the connections and the intersectionality of these three pieces. So how special education interplays and connects within the broader general system, and how that is incorporated within our early MTSS and VTmtss legislative elements, as well as the frameworks that guide our work. So we're going to get started by providing a brief overview from each of our teams in terms of what is most important for what guides our work, what is our scope and areas of expertise, and then we'll braid that together in terms of how there are overlapping points in connection in our frameworks and in our roles and responsibilities. So to that end, I will let our early MTSS colleagues take it from here.
Great, thank you, MJ. I'm ready to move to the next slide just to give a brief overview of early MTSS.
Do you see that?
Forward, one more.
The pyramid? One more? Okay.
Yeah, you forward one. There you
Perfect.
go.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so here we have Vermont's early MTSS. This is just a brief overview with a few bullet points covering just important topics. So we have Vermont's early MTSS. It's a data-driven, innovation-neutral framework designed for continuous improvement. It uses a dual approach, building effective systems and implementing high-quality, evidence-based practices to ensure scalability and long-term success. The framework supports the social, emotional, and academic development of children from birth to age 8 across Vermont's diverse early childhood settings by integrating with the pyramid model. So it's all intertwined. It's kind of like a framework within a framework, as my colleague likes to say. So early MTSS emphasizes proactive preventative strategies at universal, targeted, and individualized levels to reduce challenging behaviors, and it works in collaboration with special education. It aligns with national and state policies and standards, including the 2023 Federal Inclusion Policy, Vermont's Guiding Principles, Early Learning Standards, and Division for Early Childhood. Oh, I'm not done. Still scrolling. Give me 1 second. Let me see. No, I think I might be done.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Talia. Great. So shifting to Vermont Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. This is our primary logo that is included in the most recent version of the 2019 Field Guide. And the Vermont Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or VTmtss, provides a framework that at a minimum includes an educational support team, instructional and behavioral interventions, and accommodations that are available as needed for any student who requires support beyond what can be provided in the general education classroom. And may include intensive individualized interventions for any student requiring a higher level of support. So VTmtss is about changing opportunity for students. It's to unify a system of support, including personalization, flexible pathways, and proficiencies to support each and every one of our students. It's important to consider context when we're thinking about a VTmtss framework. VTmtss promotes a systemic approach that acknowledges the importance of Vermont's cultural context and connects schools with services and institutions within the community. It focuses among both general and special educators on preventing academic, social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties and improving our learning for each and every student through increasingly differentiated and intensified assessment, instruction, and intervention. So essentially, the framework is about a systemic approach to decision making for excellence and for equity within a culture of continuous improvement, which you can see as the outer rung of our logo here. This systemic approach supports the effective collaboration of all students to meet the academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs for each and every Vermont student. It provides a layered system of high-quality, evidence-based instruction, intervention, and assessment practices that are matched to the students' strengths and needs, and relies on the effective and timely use of meaningful and intentional action-driven data. It helps districts and their schools organize resources to accelerate and celebrate the learning of each and every student. It engages and develops the collective expertise of educators, students, family, and community partnerships. So the Vermont multi-tiered systems of support framework rooted in the 2019 Field Guide unifies general and special education and intentional ongoing collaboration. It provides a layered system of high quality evidence-based instruction, intervention, and assessment practices matched to the students and their needs, and relies on that meaningful data, as well as helps schools and districts organize resources and engages and develops the collective expertise. So those were the 5 components that you can see in the logo here that are really intertwined, interrelated, and interconnected. And so they inform and influence one another. So we're looking at a system, an educational system, as an ecosystem or various elements that are informing and relating to one another. And additionally, just content expertise that lives within the VTmtss team at the AOE. We help support technical assistance in supporting and facilitating VTmtss tools, making connections to the field guide. We support educational support teams, Section 504, hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention and response, Rule 4500, which includes restraint and seclusion, exclusionary discipline. We also administer our annual VTmtss survey, which will be rolling out in May. We also have expertise in restorative approaches, as well as parent, family, and community engagement, educational equity, and social, emotional, and mental health wellness. And moving on to special ed.
Hi, everyone. As we move from early MTSS and VTmtss to thinking about special education, we are going to do that just through the lens of Vermont's special education evaluation process. Both MTSS frameworks provide a continuum of supports and interventions to meet the diverse needs of all learners, which includes those with disabilities. And they are data-driven frameworks intended to support the entire system. And special education is also a data-driven piece of the system, and it operates under federal and state law. Special education eligibility requires a formal evaluation based on specific disability criteria, but the information gathered through universal screening in MTSS is often a crucial part of the referral process, and it can also highlight any areas of concern and contribute to the understanding of a child's needs. It's also absolutely necessary to name here that MTSS can never be used to delay an evaluation. MTSS can't be a gatekeeper to special education evaluations, but it can and should inform an evaluation if one has been initiated. If there is a legitimate concern about a disability, the focus should always be on providing timely and appropriate support and determining if a student meets the eligibility criteria for special education. But as you consider that within the framework of the evaluation process, data from MTSS should inform each bubble within this sequence. That proactive use of preventative evidence-based practices, that should be part of the overall system, and it might inform that initial referral. It could definitely inform what assessments a team decides to conduct, and it will also inform what services might be needed if a student is found eligible, in addition to the other interventions that the student might be receiving within that overall framework. Special education services could be considered the most intensive and individualized layer of support within that multi-layered system. But students with disabilities might receive supports and services within a variety of layers. So while the IEP outlines specially designed instruction and related services tailored to the child's unique needs, MTSS is the framework in which many supports are situated and organized so that they can be deployed to all students who struggle. Could you go to the next slide for me? There are 4 key pieces of legislation related to education and disability rights in the United States. So we have ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and ADA, Americans with Disabilities. We chose to include this image because it illustrates the 4 laws that work together, each of those with legislation intended to support students with disabilities. ESSA is our general rule book for all schools. This law influences how schools approach education for all students, And so IDEA, that's our special education rulebook. ESSA is the general rulebook. IDEA ensures that all students, including those with disabilities, receive a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, and that they are learning and progressing. So IDEA law mandates that world. Section 504 goes a bit broader than IDEA and also has provisions related to providing FAPE. And then ADA has an even wider reach. It impacts employment, transportation, and other areas of public life for individuals with disabilities. So this image of these federal laws, in addition to our state rules and state special education regulations, all of those pieces and parts are working in tandem to support all students who might struggle. So sometimes we might think of special education, early education, and the frameworks of MTSS as separate or parallel systems. And it's really necessary to remember that these systems are interacting with each other in an effort to support all students. Next slide. And I think I'm turning it over to Amy.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy.
So in addition to federal laws, we also have state laws that support both special education and pre-K through grade 12 multi-tiered framework. So we have Title 16 in Vermont that provides the right to public education. It's integral to Vermont's constitutional form of government. It guarantees, the political civil rights. Further, the right of education is fundamental to success of Vermont's children. So each and every student, child in Vermont, it's a rapidly changing society, global marketplace, as well as for the state's own economic and social prosperity. So for Title 16, Chapter 99 is the chapter where you're going to find multi-tiered system of supports. That's going to be Section 2902. And in Title 16, Chapter 101, that's where you're going to find special education, and that's going to be Section 2941 to 2975. So those are both supported state. And then I think we have the next slide.
Sure. So again, early MTSS, VTmtss, and special education also find a place here in the Act 173 of 2018. This was passed in May of 2018. And the purpose of this act was to enhance the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to all students who require additional supports in Vermont schools. This act changed the funding for special education from a reimbursement model to a census-based model, and based recommendations for the University of Vermont Study of Vermont state funding for special education. This act is not solely special education, however. It is really about providing supports for each and every student. And so it aligns with 5 opportunities for improving services for students who need additional support, which was described in a 2017 district management group report that the state contracted with. Those 5 points included ensuring elementary tier 1 core instruction that meets the needs of most students, provides additional instructional time outside of the core subjects aligned to the core instruction to students who struggle, rather than providing interventions instead of core instruction. And then ensuring students who struggle receive all instruction from high quality, high skilled teachers, and then create or strengthen a systems-wide approach to supporting positive student behaviors based on expert support. And so that's where we see this confluence and this interconnection, this interrelatedness with special education, as well as other multi-tiered systems of support for each and every one of our students, including from early education all the way through secondary. So the next few slides, we have differentiated some of our key components that show up in our alignment document, which can be found on our website, that aligns the key components for early MTSS and the continuum through VTmtss, which is K through grade 12. We also wanted to incorporate and celebrate special education here to also continue to model that confluence of how each and every one of our teams is interacting with one another in terms of our frameworks, our legislation that determines our roles and responsibilities. So the first key component here is systems, which can be very broad, but from an early MTSS perspective, the key component here that aligns with special education and VTmtss is having a strong systemic support. So within the early MTSS framework and pyramid model, there's a shared vision and goal that each and every child thrives within the context of secure, responsive, high quality, inclusive environments and relationships. And leadership really is fundamental in helping to sustain these thriving systems. And so establishing a local leadership team is really key throughout this continuum. Then systems show up by supporting the entirety of the system, that it's holistic and integrated in its approach, where the needs of each and every student are integrated into the broader school-wide and district-wide design. And the framework within special education of the rights and protections of students with disabilities and their families are outlined through specific processes according to federal guidelines. And then from the VTmtss lens here, for thinking about this as a prism, our area of thinking about the systemic and comprehensive approach, that was the inner piece of our logo, which really threads all of our components together. And this is where there is that common vision and shared understanding of educational equity within an inclusive school culture. And this is also where leadership can show up, establishing a district team of individuals with different and differentiated skill sets and experience with a shared mission to spark and sustain a school-wide culture of learning and improved outcomes for students. And I would say each of these components also needs to model a continuous improvement spirit. Always continuing to have a feedback loop, go through PDSA, a plan, do, study, act sequence in order to continually improve and create a dynamic system that helps us to support each and every one of our students, as well as everyone in the educational community.
The next key component is collaboration. And I think being a teacher just means that you're a collaborator. So it's always going to be a key component. So it's an easy needle to thread here, but I'm going to talk through these. And as I thought about each of these in their context, it's really easy to see that all of these bullet points are true for every layer that we're discussing when thinking about collaboration. So for this, the first component, early MTSS, has a focus on partnership and collaboration. And that includes respecting and supporting families as experts, partners, and decision makers to build caring communities, and partners that are accepting of differences and fostering a sense of belonging. And it includes making informed decisions and collaborating with community partners to support each and every child. And again, like I started off with, all of those components can also be said about special education. Special education law has collaboration.
Refining instruction, identifying student needs early, or adjusting systemic practices. And then the last touch point is family and student engagement. So at least in VTmtss, there's an explicit call for clear communication with families and students, which supports the overall goal of inclusive and transparent practices, which early MTSS special education also support throughout their approach.
Great. And then we have the last key component, of the early MTSS and Vermont MTSS frameworks. And that is the key component of professional learning and expertise building. So we're looking for well-designed professional development, equitable allocation and use of resources for staff, adults working in the learning environments, professionals learning to implement those high quality evidence-based practices that we're talking about. So we're saying to fidelity, meaning as intended by those researchers across all activities, within the learning environments. We're also looking in special education with specialized skills such as, a knowledge of and the ability to implement those research-supported instructional strategies, interventions, and supports really tailored to specific disabilities and learning needs. And then, for the Vermont MTSS framework, we're just expanding, the expertise, creating dynamic contexts, so in which individuals, necessarily hold a range and variety of expertise related to their roles, their responsibilities, their talents and interests. And there's that expectation across the board that staff will participate in ongoing embedded professional learning and really align their expertise with each and every student need. So.
Great. Thanks all. So that is what we had to share in terms of key components and the intersectionality of each and every one of our teams here. We had hoped that we could open this up for thoughts or reflections from our audience. And how are you making sense of these areas of intersectionality? You're welcome to use the chat feature if that is accessible to you. I'm also sharing my screen, so unfortunately I can't see if there are any hands up. So I'll need a friend to help me with that.
Do we have these slides?
Yes, we can certainly send these slides ahead of time. We are also recording. This is MJ. So we're also recording and we'll be adding this to our VTmtss Office Hour YouTube playlist. But this content will certainly be accessible more broadly.
If it would get the conversation started, we can always talk about a couple things that when we hear sometimes from programs or school districts, kind of themes that we hear. One includes just, the fluidity of the multi-tiered framework. And so, we remind individuals, this is how it intersects with special education, that, each student is a general education student first and foremost. And then we're building in these tiers, the universal, targeted, individualized supports, but they're very fluid, and children and students move in and out, just depending on what support they need at that given moment and how they're, building their skills. So that's something that, a question that we get, is there such a thing as a tier 2 student or a tier 3 student? And, just like with special education, we just have general education students. So.
This is MJ. We could also take a few minutes to process here as well. We provided a lot of information and displaying some of the intersectionalities of early MTSS, VTmtss, and special education as well. So I'm inclined to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. And certainly welcome additional conversation, thoughts, questions that might be coming up. I will share within our division, we've been building more collaborative and communicative inroads for some of our areas of expertise, such as exclusionary discipline. There's, some interplay and some connection with some of the reports we receive from about exclusionary discipline and hopefully and ultimately thinking about preventative strategies and guidance to help support each and every one of our students so that they're in a capacity to be able to learn and thrive in their educational communities. Another piece with hazing, harassment, and bullying I facilitate an division, interagency prevention work group, HHB prevention work group, which has representation of special education and early education, among others, across the agency, as we're thinking about how do we help further promote positive school climate environments. And so those are just some very brief examples off the top of my head of how we're engaging with one another and really seeking the understanding, the significance, and quite frankly, the importance of us being able to engage with one another, because a lot of the work touches upon all of our areas of expertise. I'm seeing in the chat here, thank you, Erin, for your contribution. One thing that comes up a lot in early education world is what early MTSS supports, not special education, from the school district looks like in partner programs, what districts' obligations are versus limited resources. I'm curious, Amy or Talia, if you have any thoughts with that question.
And we agree. We are trying to kind of close the equity gap on that. And we know that initially when early MTSS, it's very grant dependent, and kind of the first wave was put a lot of support in the public school system, public universal pre-K system. And then we've had multiple grants come in since then where we've expanded. So we've included those private partner programs, where we've also have another grant, the state personnel development grant, where we're expanding even further in the other realm into early intervention and children's integrative services to kind of have that full continuum, so we can have a birth through grade 12 continuum. But in regards to the private programs, I think with a lot of the grants that we've been running, we're also trying to create access to those trainings, free trainings. We're trying to have a variety of times for different programs to be able to access those. If it sometimes the school system seems to be they seem to have access during the daytime, whereas childcare programs seem to need more access to evening trainings. So we've been supplying that. The coaching is varied in that the coaching is meeting programs where they're at and expanding from there. If they need to meet in the evening time, we are making that happen as well. And I think we would also talk about the partnership agreements that are occurring between a public and private universal pre-K program, and what can be written into that partnership agreement. Can we create PD days that are similar across the district? So it includes the private partner. Everybody's exposed to the same language, the same information. What are other opportunities that we can build into that? Is there coaching that can be built in? And by coaching, I mean, this is an internal capacity kind of building framework. So do we have internal capacity within the private and the public program where we can maybe exchange services? So that's something else to consider. Talia, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, you touched on it briefly. It's what we see a lot is just that school district level and private program level, just that communication piece, where it's how one hand washes the other, and what do I need support in mostly. So that proactive approach, I think, is what you touched on, which is what we see. So that's good.
And I would say the early education team, we do provide technical assistance to public and private programs, and we definitely have the same consistent message. The components of the framework that we're trying to work on, the practices that are expected within universal pre-K, and we definitely encourage private or programs to reach out to us, and we can work with helping them.
Thanks to Leah and Amy. Any other questions or thoughts that are coming up for folks? This is my pedagogical coaching pause here. The fellow introverts out there. Well, I'm happy to share my screen again and move forward with the slides. We thought it was really necessary to show the interrelatedness not only of our frameworks and the roles and responsibilities of each of our teams, but how they collaborate and how they are in itself really connected and interrelated. And so we would love to hear from the field. What are some future topics that you'd like us to further explore and expand upon? This is a really rich opportunity as we are starting to build out next year's VTmtss Office Hours series and topical areas of focus to really think intentionally, purposefully, and strategically about how we can continue to show the braiding of our interconnectedness and how we are in relationship with one another in building ecosystems of support for each and every one of our students, as well as for everyone in our community, our educational communities as well. So we will certainly offer an exit ticket in the chat. We'll also follow up with an email that will also include the slide deck. And as previously mentioned, this is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our VTmtss Office Hour YouTube playlist to serve as a resource moving forward. But we would really love to hear from you, as you're thinking about this interrelatedness, this intersectionality of special education, early education, and the Vermont multi-tiered systems of support. What are some future topics that you think would be really helpful and beneficial for your leadership teams, for your educational communities, and for us to help provide some resources and support around? Yes, Jean. Hello.
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
I think something that keeps coming up in our preschool is where sort of a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention to a special ed evaluation, like how it's sort of a continuum at times, but how to set up so that can all come together well. Like if a child doesn't qualify but does need interventions, how to write those plans, etc. So I think that connection would be helpful.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane. Not to put my colleagues on the spot, but anyone from early ed or special ed who might be able to provide some element there.
We'll ask Cassie, but I appreciate the question because we do talk a lot about how early MTSS, Vermont MTSS, special education, these are all data driven, processes, frameworks. So I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So you're wondering at one point when we're starting to put, we put universal supports in place, we're gathering data, we're talking with the family, we can see that a child still needs support. So we're putting more targeted intentional teaching in place to try to support that student, gathering some data. We can see that we still have some persistent challenging behaviors that are occurring, and at what line are we going from individualized plan to special education? Would you say that's
or just what?
Oh, you're muted.
Jean, I think you just muted.
Sorry. Like what are, I mean, I have a relatively good understanding of it, but I don't think everybody else does. And I don't think people always understand what all of their options are. If a child does not qualify, or if family doesn't want to go through an eval process, whatever, like what are those other pieces that would be helpful to understand how to do that and how to formally put a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention plan in place, and sort of that has some support for that child, especially going forward when they're going into kindergarten.
Right. Well, and one thing, yeah, I think you bring up a good point about transition planning to be included in there. But I think something that comes up for us, intentional teaching is definitely across the board an area that we see as more challenging, being very purposeful and intentional with specific things like self-regulation and problem solving, friendship skills, identifying, feelings, things like that. And if children don't have that, then, their ability to access and participate is much more challenging. And so the individualized planning, something we don't see occurring sometimes is that functional assessment, and or we see a functional assessment, an FBA that's occurred, but it's not developmentally appropriate maybe for that 3, 4, or 5-year-old age group. So we do, if anyone is interested, we can supply this, but we do have early MTSS functional assessments that are age appropriate, that can help determine the function or hypothesize the function behind the behavior. So then you can very intentionally write an individualized plan. Now, the individualized plan, say a child is eligible for special education, something else that we, kind of have people have questions about, do you have the individualized plan and then you also have the IEP? And we would say that the IEP team should be included if a child does have, if they have been found eligible for special education, that IEP team should be included when developing an individualized plan to further support the child, to create look at decreasing the more challenging behavior and increasing more appropriate behaviors. But if we don't have those two entities working together, then we kind of run into issues of unintentionally changing a child's individualized education program. And so that's why we need to make sure the IEP team is, not to get off topic too much, but that's something that comes up when we're talking about individualized planning. But the functional assessment, if you make an individualized plan or a behavior plan and you don't have that functional assessment completed, it's almost a wash. I mean, I would honestly say it's a wash, because you're kind of grasping and trying to figure out, but you don't know what the function is behind the behavior. And I know Jean knows this too, because she's one of our coaches. But so I appreciate the question, but without that functional assessment, we're really not, it's very challenging then to create something that can be individualized that truly supports that child. And I don't know if Talia or Cassie or Beth, I know you're on here too, if you want to say anything further.
I think Jean was actually asking about kids who were not on IEPs who needed that tier 3 support, which those children exist. And I think we forget that. I think there's an automatic assumption that tier 3 means special ed. And it doesn't, not necessarily, but your point where you're saying, yes, you have to have a team as a part of that function behavior assessment and creating that behavior support plan if they are on an IEP, but it does not necessarily mean a child with challenging behaviors doesn't necessarily mean a child who has a disability.
Right. No, even without.
And the other piece, and I think that's it. I think that's where there's a struggle from programs. They think, I'm running into this as a coach as well, that when they've really done everything at tier 2, they want to go special ed, and they're not feeling comfortable with that tier 3 process for kids who are not identified.
Mm-hmm. And really, that's a teaming process. But you're right. I'm not saying that it automatically means that a child has an IEP, but regardless if a child has an IEP or not, that functional assessment has to occur in order to write that individualized plan. And I see another hand up.
Great. Ashley, one of our AOE colleagues.
So my prior district, I was the SEL coach, but I also did the simple FBAs and the behavior intervention plans for my district when safety wasn't a concerning factor. And a lot of my plans were behavior support plans that were embedded in that EST model. So taking what resources we did have around, that tier 2 intervention and that universal intervention, but also utilizing that IEP eval. So even if they don't qualify, there usually is recommendations from a school or a district psychologist or whoever evaluated. They give recommendations, and not all of those recommendations are, meeting with a clinician 2 times a week, which is difficult to have for support if a student is not on an IEP, but providing those additional ones that are in there, they might be hard to find, but they're definitely in there or you can ask that person who did the assessment, maybe what are some interventions that we could try that are still, in that tier 1, tier 2 support. So that was really helpful for a lot of our kiddos in our district. Having that, that robust universal level implementation and then that tier 2 support added on was sometimes enough for most of our children.
Thanks, Ashley. Cassie, just wanted to give you some airtime if you have any thoughts on this question.
No, I think Ashley just covered what I was going to name too, that, yeah, there's often a lot of recommendations embedded in that reporting.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jean, for that question and for that good conversation. So for the convenience of time, we'd like to start closing up here. We really do want to hear from you as part of our division, the Student Support Services Division at the Vermont Agency of Education, about future topics that you'd like us to further explore and expand upon. We will provide a slide with our contact information and certainly welcome and celebrate you reaching out to us as we're thinking about future planning for these office hours and other additional training and professional learning opportunities too. So we just wanted to posit this question and appreciate what you have to share and what what would be most useful for you. So as we're wrapping up, here's that promised contact slide. Our facilitators today was Cassie Santo from Special Education, Amy Murphy and Talia Garcia from Early Education, and myself, MJ from VTmtss. We were also joined by other VTmtss colleagues, Nancy Helen, who engages in educational equity and family community engagement, and Ashley Riando, who is our point person for Rule 4500, restraint and seclusion. So we certainly welcome you to reach out. Ashley will also put our exit ticket into the chat, and we certainly welcome you to complete that to give us a little bit more feedback about our series and our programming for today, and then thinking beyond what are some future programming opportunities that would be most useful for you and your leadership teams. We also want to lift up and forecast that our final VTmtss office hours for this series, for this academic year, if you can believe that, is May. So May 15th from 3 to 4 p.m., we will offer an office hour opportunity to talk about supporting our students through transitions, through early through high school. So all those really important points of transition, and have a conversation about that and provide some resources of support. So you're certainly welcome to register yourself and your colleagues for the upcoming VTmtss office hours on May 15th. We'd love to see you there and have you participate. And of course, hear your questions, your comments, and your thoughts as we move forward in this work together. So with that, thank you so much to all of our Student Support Services colleagues here, Special Education, Early Education, VTmtss. We really appreciate each and every one of you and the dedicated time that you've taken to be part of this experience with us and to engage with us. Please reach out if you need anything or have additional questions or thoughts as we move forward. And just in deep gratitude and appreciation for what you're doing for our Vermont communities and for our Vermont students. We really value that. Take good care.
Thanks.